Hello again, team. Butterfly Lion by Michael Morpurgo, chapters 9 and 10. Chapter 9, A Lot of Old Codswallop. The dog was whining at the kitchen door. "Let Jack out for me, will you?" said the old lady. "There's a dear." "I'll tell you what, I'll fetch down the kite Bertie made for me, shall I? You'd like to see it, wouldn't you?" And she went out. I was only too happy to let the dog out and shut the door on him. She was back sooner than I expected. "There," she said, setting the kite down on the table in front of me. "What do you think of it, then?" It was huge, much bigger than I had expected, and covered in dust. It was made of brown canvas, stretched over a wooden frame. All the kites I had seen had been more colourful, more flamboyant. I think the disappointment must have shown in my face. "She still flies, you know," she said, blowing the dust off. "You should see how she goes. You should see her." She sat down in her chair and I waited for her to begin again. "Now then, where was I?" she asked. "I'm so forgetful these days." "Bertie's last letter," I said. "He was just going off to the war." "But what about the White Lion, the White Prince? What happened to him?" I could hear the dog barking wildly outside. She smiled at me. "Everything comes to he who waits," she said. "Why don't you have a look out of the window?" I looked. The lion on the hillside was blue no more. It was white now, and the dog was bounding across the hillside, chasing away a cloud of blue butterflies that rose all around him. "He chases everything that moves," she said. "But don't worry, he won't catch a single one. He never catches anything." "Not that lion," I said. "I meant the lion in the story. What happened to him?" "Don't you see? They're the same. The lion out there on the hillside and the lion in the story, they're the same." "I don't understand," I said. "You soon will," she replied. "You soon will." She took a deep breath before she began again. For many years, Bertie never spoke about the fighting in the trenches. He always said it was a nightmare best forgotten, best kept to himself. But later on, when he had time to reflect, when time had done its healing perhaps, then he told me something of how it had been. At 17, he'd found himself marching with his regiment along the straight roads of northern France, up to the front line, heads and hearts high with hope and expectation. Within a few months, he was sitting huddled at the bottom of a muddy trench, hands over his head between his knees, curling himself into as tight a ball as he could go, sick with terror, as the shells and whiz-bangs blew the world apart around him. Then the whistle would blow, and they'd be out and over the top into no man's land, bayonets fixed and walking toward the German trenches into the rat-tat-tat of machine-gun fire. To the left of him and to the right of him his friends would fall, and he would walk on, waiting for the bullet with his name on, which he knew could cut him down at any moment. At dawn, they always had to come out of their dugouts and stand to in the trenches, just in case there was an attack. The Germans often attacked at dawn. That's how it was on the morning of his 20th birthday. They came swarming over no man's land out of the early morning sun, but were soon spotted and mown down like so much ripe corn. Then they were turning and running. The whistles went, and Bertie led his men over the top to counterattack. But as always, the Germans were expecting them, and the usual slaughter began. Bertie was hit in the leg and fell into a shell hole. He thought of waiting there all day, and then of crawling back under cover of darkness, but his wound was bleeding badly and he could not staunch it. He decided he had to try to crawl back to the trenches while he still had the strength to do it. Hugging the ground, he was almost at the wire, almost back to safety, when he heard someone crying out in no man's land. It was a cry he could not ignore. He found two of his men lying side by side, and so badly wounded they could not move. One of them was already unconscious. He hoisted him onto his shoulders and made for the trenches, the bullets whipping and whining all around him. The man was heavy, and Bertie fell several times under his weight, but he got himself to his feet again and staggered on. And eventually they tumbled together down into the trench. The stretcher-bearers tried to take Bertie away. He'd bleed to death, they said, but he would not listen. One of his own men was lying still wounded out there in no man's land, and he was going to bring him in no matter what. Waving his hands above his head, Bertie climbed out of the trench and walked forward. The firing stopped almost at once. He was so weak himself by now that he could scarcely walk, but he managed to reach the wounded man and drag him back. They say that in the end both sides, German and British, were up on the parapets and cheering him on as he stumbled back toward his lines. Then other men were running out to help him, and after that he didn't know any more. When he woke up, he found himself in hospital, lying in bed with the two friends he had rescued on either side. He was still there some weeks later, when he was told that he was to be awarded the Victoria Cross for his bravery under fire. He was the hero of the hour, the pride of his regiment. Afterwards, Bertie always called it a lot of old codswallop. To be really brave, he said, you have to overcome fear. You have to be frightened in the first place. And he hadn't been. There wasn't time to be frightened. He did what he had to without thinking, just as he had saved the white lion cub all those years before when he was a boy in Africa. Of course, they made a great fuss of him in the hospital, and he loved all that, but his leg did not heal as well as it should have. He was still there in the hospital when I found him. It was not entirely by accident that I found him. For over 3 years now there had been no letter, no word from him at all. He had warned me, I know, but the long silence was hard to bear. Every time the postman came, I hoped, and the pang of disappointment was sharper each time there was no letter from him. I told all to Nanny Mason, who dried my tears and told me to pray, and that she would too. She was sure there'd be a letter soon. Without Nanny, I don't know how I would have gone on living. I was so miserable. I had seen the wounded men coming back from France, blinded, gassed, crippled, and always dreaded seeing Bertie's face among them. I had seen the long lists in the newspapers of all the men who'd been killed or who were missing. I looked each day for his name and thanked God every time I did not find it. But still, he never wrote, and I had to know why. I thought that maybe he had been so badly wounded that he could not write, and that he was lying in hospital, alone and unloved. So I determined I would become a nurse. I would go to France and heal and comfort as best I could, and just hope that somehow I might find him. But I soon discovered that amongst so many men in uniform, it would be hopeless to go looking for him. I did not even know his regiment nor his rank. I had no idea where to begin. I was sent to a hospital some 50 miles behind the lines, not too far from Amiens. The hospital was a converted chateau with turrets and great wide staircases and chandeliers in the wards. But it was so cold in winter that many of the men died as much from the cold as from their wounds. We all did what we could for them, but we were short of doctors and short of medicines. There were always so many men coming in, and their wounds were so terrible. Each time we saved one, it was a joy for us. In the midst of the suffering all around, we needed some joy, believe me. I was at breakfast one morning. It was June of 1918. I was reading a magazine, the Illustrated London News. I turned the page and saw a face I knew at once. He was older, thinner in the face and unsmiling, but I was sure it was Bertie. His eyes were deep-set and gentle, just as I remembered them. And there was his name, Captain Albert Andrews, V.C. There was a whole article underneath about what he had done and how he was still recovering from his wounds in a hospital. A hospital that turned out to be little more than 10 miles away. Wild horses would not have kept me from him. The next Sunday, I cycled over. He was sleeping when I saw him first, propped up on his pillows, one hand behind his head. "Hello," I said. He opened his eyes and frowned at me. It was a moment or two before he knew me. "Been in the wars, have you?" I said. "Something like that," he replied. Chapter 10. The White Prince. They said I could take him out in his wheelchair every Sunday, so long as I didn't tire him, so long as he was back by supper. As Bertie said, It was just like our Sundays had been when we were little. There was only one place we could go to, a small village only a mile away. There wasn't much left of the village, a few streets of battered houses, a church with its steeple broken off halfway up, and a cafe in the square, thankfully still intact. I would push him in his chair some of the way, and he would hobble along with his stick when he felt strong enough. Mostly, we would sit in the cafe and talk, or walk along the river and talk. We had so many years to catch up on. He hadn't written, he told me, because he had thought that each day at the front might be his last, that he might be dead by sunset. So many of his friends were dead. Sooner or later it had to be his turn. He wanted me to forget him, so that I wouldn't know when he was killed, so that I wouldn't be hurt. What you don't know, you don't grieve over, he said. He had never imagined that he would survive, that he would ever see me again. It was on one of our Sunday outings that I noticed the poster across the street on the wall of what was left of the post office. The colours were faded, and the bottom half had been torn away, but at the top the print was quite clear. It was in French. Cirque Merlot, it read, and underneath, Le Prince Blanc, the White Prince, and just discernible, a picture of a lion roaring, a white lion. Bertie had seen it too. It's him, he breathed. It has to be him. With no help from me, he was out of his wheelchair, stick in hand, limping across the street toward the cafe. The cafe owner was wiping down the tables outside the pavement. The circus, Bertie began, pointing back at the poster. He didn't speak much French, so he shouted in English instead. You know, lions, elephants, clowns. The man looked at him blankly and shrugged. So Bertie started roaring like a lion and clawing up the air. I could see alarmed faces at the window of the cafe, and the man was backing away, shaking his head. I ripped the poster off the wall and brought it over. My French was a little better than Bertie's. The cafe owner understood at once. Ah, he said, smiling with relief. Monsieur Merlot, le cirque. C'est triste, très triste. And he went on in broken English. The circus, he's finished. Sad, very sad. The soldiers, you understand, they want beer and wine and girls maybe. They do not want the circus. No one comes, and so Monsieur Merlot, he have to close the circus. But what can he do with all the animals? He keep them, he feed them, but the shells come, more and more they come. And his house, how you say it, is bombarded. Many animals are dead. But Monsieur Merlot, he stay. He keep only the elephants, the monkeys, the lion, the white prince. Everyone love the white prince. The army, they take all the hay for the horses. There is no food for the animals. So Monsieur Merlot, he take his gun and he have to shoot them. No more circus. Finish. Triste. Très triste. All of them? Cried Bertie. He shot all of them? No, said the man. Not all. He keep the white prince. He could not shoot the white prince. Never. Monsieur Merlot, he bring him from Africa many years ago. Most famous lion in all of France. He loved the lion like a son. That lion, he make Monsieur Merlot a rich man. But he is not rich anymore. He lose everything. Now he have nothing. Just the white prince. It is true. I think they die together. Maybe they die already. Who knows? This Monsieur Merlot, Bertie said. Where does he live? Where can I find him? The man pointed out of the village. 7, maybe 8 kilometers, he said. It is an old house by the river. Over the bridge and on the left. Not far. But maybe Monsieur Merlot is not there anymore. Maybe the house is not there. Who knows? And with a last shrug, he turned and went indoors. There were always army lorries rumbling through the village, so it was not at all difficult to hitch a ride. We left the wheelchair behind in the cafe. Bertie said it would only get in the way, and he could manage well enough with his stick. We found the house, a mill house just over the bridge where the cafe owner had said it would be. There wasn't much left of it. The barns all around were shell blasted, the ruins blackened by the fire. Only the main house still had a roof, but it too had not gone unscathed. One corner of the building had been holed, and was partially covered by canvas that flapped in the wind. There was no sign of life. Bertie knocked on the door several times, but there was no answer. The place frightened me. I wanted to leave at once, but Bertie would not hear of it. When he pushed gently at the door, It opened. Everything was dark inside. I did not want to go in, but Bertie took me firmly by the hand. "He's in here," he whispered. "I can smell him." And it was true. There was a smell in the air, pungent and rank, and to me quite unfamiliar. "Qui est là?" said a voice from the darkness of the room. "Qu'est-ce que vous voulez?" He spoke so quietly you could hardly hear him over the rush of the river outside. I could just make out a large bed under the window at the far end of the room. A man was lying there, propped up on a pile of cushions. "Monsieur Merlot?" Bertie asked. "Oui?" As we walked forward together, Bertie went on. "I am Bertie Andrews. Many years ago you came to my farm in Africa and you bought a white lion cub. Do you still have him?" As if in answer, the white blanket at the end of the bed became a lion. Rising from the bed, it sprang down and was padding toward us, a terrible rumble in his throat. I froze where I was as the lion came right up to us. "It's all right, Milly. He won't hurt us," said Bertie, putting an arm round me. "We're old friends." Moaning and yowling, the lion rubbed himself up against Bertie so hard that we had to hold on to each other to stop ourselves from falling over.